Hello, my name is Susan Pitcairn, and I'd like to talk with you today about 3 principles of art, which really have a lot to do with why we perceive something as beautiful. Shortly after moving to lovely Sedona, Arizona, to pursue painting, an artist raised the question to me, what is it that makes Sedona so beautiful? Now that simple question triggered in me an avalanche of insights and a perception that there's 3 core elements that seem to be at the base of all forms of art and culture, and it seems, life in general. Let's start this exploration with a poem. Why is Sedona so beautiful? And why is the rugged orangeness of this world so lovely, rising straight up to infinite blues, or emerging as lost jewels from mysterious waters that invite us to sit and be still? And why do her breakthroughs of storm-freed light so touch our hearts? And praise the long view that whispers the promise that, no matter what, life will go on. And on this hope, even her great spires sit as eternal lovers. All these ways of coming together, there are these timeless slow clouds that sail over all elements, embracing air, water, earth, and fiery sun, a world of opposites, a host of one. The first principle, where it all comes from, unity, the principle of oneness. Unbelievably vast, our universe shows great unity, order, and connectedness in both microcosm and macrocosm. Whether it comes from the Big Bang, God, or some strange dream, surely creation is one magnificent whole, whatever it is. And we are surely each inseparably connected to that one. It's the essence of life, and so it's also the essence of art. It's beyond all forms, all words and ideas, even beyond the visible world, beyond all that comes and goes. We can sense this unity through unconditional love, joy, peace, acceptance, gratitude, and well-being. Those kinds of feelings are our connection, our felt connection with our source. And it's not without humor. So we're inseparably part and parcel of this wholeness, whether or not we sense it, and somehow it finds ways to emerge in our artistic creations. Let's take a look. For example, light is one of the most important symbols of this one spirit. This is a lovely painting by Frederick Church called Rainy Season in the Tropics, which I first saw in person at the Young Museum in San Francisco. Really striking, and I think that inspired me to include more light in my own work. The Luminists, of which he was a member, believed that by not using strong brush strokes, but just having everything very smooth and unaltered from the way it actually looks, that they were taking the ego out of the art. So it was a conscious spiritual choice for them to use that particular smooth, almost photorealistic style. This lovely piece here is another inspiring example of the use of light, Georges de la Tour. And don't you love the way the light comes through the hands there of the child, and that's really what the whole thing's about, is they're sharing this light and this loving feeling between them. Now, I've been inspired a lot to use light in my own pieces, and it's a very natural thing to do, particularly in dramatic places like the Grand Canyon and other rock formations in the Southwest, which I often paint. Or I'll use it on trees like this. This example here also shows another way of expressing unity, interconnections. You can use objects that are kind of intertwined like these trees, or you can use overlaps of brush strokes and masses and so forth, and this can serve to express that underlying order and harmony. Now, another important thing I've identified is there's an archetypal symbol, which you could just call the passage, maybe the journey. It's in many paintings as well as in architecture. A passage really is just a transition that leads us home to this great mysterious essence. A pathway or road is a common type of passage. Often it's curving out of view or fading to a mystery beyond somewhere. In landscape and architecture, paths, doors, and windows are practical passages, but they often have a spiritual quality to them as well. You know, they just gives you a good feeling when you're there. In this example, in the garden, the path is curving harmoniously to a temple-like place of rest. Now, isn't that a symbol, too, of the unity space? Similarly, a warm, inviting door, which we see in homes all over the world, gives us a nice way of transitioning or making a passage into the place we call home, which in itself is a symbol, you know, of the deeper place. A light-filled gate here invites us to the other side. It's pretty neat, isn't it? It's a transition or a passage. Now here in this beautiful colored pencil piece by Robert Guthrie, we're glimpsing into a mystery through a window. It's a jewel-like kind of place that's inside. That's very suggestive of the formless, you know, the spiritual dimension. I was attracted to do this pastel of window rock because I love the sense of a passage to the sky. Now here Edward Hopper leads us in a passage to a great light and a boundless ocean. Wow, what a sense of vastness and mystery there, huh? Some passages will take us right into a tunnel of light. Like here I did a painting and someone challenged me to do an abstract because I'm always doing realistic pieces, and I did this one. And my mother liked it very much, and it ended up being one that she had with her in her hospice room when she passed away. It was perfect. Now here, Anna Gellenbeck not only gives us that tunnel effect into the light, but also the passage of the highway that's leading towards this mysterious place. I mean, it's entitled Richardson Highway, Alaska, but it's really much more than that, I think. Here, Marcia Burt has a beautiful acrylic of the ocean, and there's a vastness which suggests the infinite nature of the source. You know, that's a feeling that we get by the ocean. I think that's why it's so popular. And then we also all love skies, looking at a vast sky. One of my favorite paintings I did called The Vast Center. Now here's another way of expressing this dimension, which I'm calling unity, or the spiritual dimension. The open, still, meditative aspect of it can be expressed through emptiness and simplicity. This empty boat really attracted me that way. And of course the reflection of the water is another way, you know, a symbol. It's like looking deep inside. Eric Thompson, whose figure we saw earlier, has another example here of the open quality. It's not only open, but it's also a kind of a circle, isn't it? And it's very simple and Zen-like. And he, in fact, I understand, meditates every day, so that fits. Circles are an archetype of wholeness and unity, and they go back, you know, since the beginning of civilization, really. this very complex mandala from Tibet, shows that clearly the world or the universes or whatever are full of complexity, but it's all held together on the outside by a simple circle of wholeness. Sun faces are also common circular symbols that are found around the world, and as we know, the sun was once an object of worship, even before sunscreen. Now here's a striking contemporary painting that links an ancient circle of pottery to the land and the sky, to nature. It's a surprise kind of expression of unity. The artist is Sally Hall, who lives here in Sedona. And then likewise, we were just talking about ceramics. I mean, pots, bowls, plates, these are all natural circles. And the very process of throwing in ceramic arts is a very centering process. A circle, an expression of wholeness and unity. In architecture, circles can be very stunning. I just love this beautiful ceiling created by Tom Brady and Dee Blanco in Santa Fe for their home. It's supported by a circular fireplace. What a work of art. And then also notice the skylights at the top, bringing in the light from above. Now here in this simple cottage I saw on a garden tour in Eugene, Oregon, a circle is used as an opening or passage also. And it also has that surprise element, which, and again, you might say is another aspect of the mystery of life. And this circular patio, look how the blue tiles are pointing right to the center of everything, which is a neutral, almost void sort of look, and it's a circle. Spiritual imagery, of course, goes straight for the unity principle, as in the religious and mythic origins of art. Pieta by Michelangelo is a good example of traditional religious art that gives a feeling also. It brings out compassion and love. And you'll find often that statues and portraits of spiritual figures can evoke a sense of peace and love, compassion. And Buddhas are getting very popular, I think, for that reason. And then like angels and others that may give us a feeling of love, innocence, purity, as in this piece by William Bourget. And they may just be simply a transcendent image of an ordinary person, as in this beautiful piece, Sarah, by Vince Fazio, a portrait of his daughter, just breathing in the stillness and peace and joy of a sunset. Artists can also help us see the inner beauty of something, like a flower, with all its light, with the circles, and the sense of joy, and just sheer vibrance that comes out of a flower. One of Georgia O'Keeffe's favorite subjects, as in this abstraction, White Rose. And you see how it does have the circle theme and the light as well. Here, Twilight Lanterns by Richard Drayton, a colored pencil piece, also has that glow at the center of each flower. You notice a strong use of light and just the intimate detail that looks into the heart of things. This large, unusual painting melds an image that seems to me like a bird, like an eagle or something, with a mountain, and that emergence of the two different entities, I guess you'd say, is a symbolic sort of expression of unity. That's Anatomy Lesson by Chuck Forsman, found at the Phoenix Art Museum. The very style with which an artist undertakes a painting can express their approach to the spirit. For example, detailed work requires great powers of meditative observation and connectedness in the very process itself. Will Tapia, a Sedona artist who works only from life, who doesn't use any camera, and he likes to have that connection to the living landscape or person. It can also work from a photograph too, as in this gorgeous large piece by Libby Caldwell. She's called The Casual Vendor. She's taken weeks and weeks to create this painting, and with infinite detail and careful planning. She did a little bit of editing of the original scene, but it's an amazing piece, and it draws the attention of those who look at it too. It teaches us power of perception. But on the other hand, an artist can have a loose, painterly, colorist style, and that draws upon and expresses the vibrance and the joy of life, as you would see in many of the Impressionist paintings, like these water lilies by Claude Monet. And in a contemporary version, you'll see, like Marcia Burt, a Santa Barbara artist, often uses bright, expressive colors and an interplay of form that's spontaneous and free, with loose brush strokes and a very intuitive way of working. And that expresses the qualities of that unity or the one spirit that are playful, joyful, interconnected, harmonious. Now, understanding this whole process has really helped me to see that even kinds of art that I didn't particularly like, I have to admit I never really liked Jackson Pollock's work, but he's expressing how I see that aspect of creation that's chaotic, passionate, full of surprises, and unpredictable. So when he would throw his paint on the canvas, he never knew what was going to happen. So he was just kind of turning himself over to whatever, the one wanted to create. Now, another abstract painter has a very different approach, very orderly, very planned, it would seem. And, I would look at a painting like this in the past and sort of say, well, it's just graphic design. I mean, anybody could do that, But when I saw this piece in a museum in Santa Fe, it really spoke to me. Gave a strong feeling of harmony. I walked up to it, and its name was Harmony. Isn't that amazing? So obviously her intention went deeply into this piece too, expressed itself. In fact, abstract art can really free us from the constraints of form and take us straight to the felt essence of the spiritual. Jan Sitz, who's written a book called Texture and Form and Feeling, or something like that, I'm sorry. She's works purely with abstraction now. We're used to work with realistic painting, but she finds a real freedom, texture, color, and feeling. That's the name of it. And she likes to just explore the pure abstraction. There's a real freedom in that. Okay, it goes on and on. We could probably look at thousands of paintings and see how this theme of unity or spirituality appears in just very diverse subjects and styles. I invite you to look for it the next time you look at a beautiful painting or landscape in nature, as well as when you watch a great movie or read a great book. Back to painting. Let's look at a few technical things you can do to bring unity to a piece. First, a colored ground, left showing, can create a unity throughout the whole painting. This one is a pastel I made on black pastel paper, and I left quite a lot of it showing through, and that just brings a mystery and a unity into the whole piece. The Impressionists did this a lot. They would use oftentimes a kind of a light tan background, and here in this piece I actually used masonite, and I just put a clear shellac on it, and then did an oil painting on top of it. And I was able to leave a lot of it fairly open and exposed, so you could just see the ground that became part of the painting. That allowed me to keep it more simple and fresh. And it also brings this warm tone throughout the whole piece that unites it. Now, after a painting is dry, you can also use a translucent glaze on top of it to unify a mass. You can pull the foreground closer to you with warm glazes, or maybe put a cool black glaze on the distance, or you can just unify the whole piece, maybe with some warm color. This is has a bit of a reddish, purplish tone over the whole thing. And then what you can do after you've done that, like in this case I used a warm ochre glaze over most of the painting, but you can pop things in the other places, like the foreground I used brighter purples on top of the glaze, and that little green patch too, to stand out against that. Another kind of technical thing that you can do is to have a strong center of interest that points to the essence in the story. In this case, the aspirational peak of the mountain. Painters can use lead-ins and lines, as I did here, where the diagonals are leading the eye to the peak. And you can also use your strongest contrasts of value, hue, line, texture, and so on to accentuate the focal point to tell the story. There's also, you can't see it in this photo, but there's also some pretty strong impasto texture at the peak, again, to accentuate the story there, the center of interest. So unity is our source, but we do also express in the world of form. And what is form? Well, all form really depends upon contrast, or you could call it opposites or polarities. As Lao Tzu once said, the Tao gives birth to one gives birth to two, meaning duality, which gives birth to three and to all things. Now, that brings us to our second major principle, contrast, the principle of polarities. You could say opposites, dualities, two. The yin-yang is an ancient Chinese symbol of the polarized opposites or contrasts that underlie the created universe. And an interesting thing about the symbol is it expresses that things are always in motion. It's never completely static, never completely balanced. As one side increases and becomes dominant, it begins to seek balance and engenders the seed of its opposite. So as the black part there at the top gets bigger and bigger, it looks for the light, and then there's a little seed of light. Then it becomes the white part, and then that becomes too powering, and then the black. It doesn't mean good and bad or light and dark, but just more, it's a general statement about opposites, that they seek balance between them, and they're in constant motion. In modern times, science confirms that atoms, the building block of matter, have two opposite polarities, the positive charge of protons and the negative charge of electrons. Opposites really are the spice of life, aren't they? I mean, the greater the contrast, the more tension and drama, and the more it draws our attention and our interest. Could this be why we like drama and war, not to mention romance? Oh, wait a minute, wait, says Smiley Face. Stop this chatter. What do you mean, drama and war? What happened to the light and the all one thing? Hey, you're just creating your own reality. Just be like me, all good and happy and loving, says the light side. Then you'll see the light. But later, the light begins to get dark, and she says, oh no, I don't feel so good anymore. And then the dark side says, it's called change, baby, the price of form, so get over it. Am I talking to myself? Okay. Well, that's right, Smiley Face. Opposites and change are the story of the universe. First the one, then the two, then the 10,000 gazillion things, sometimes fun and sometimes not so fun. Besides electromagnetic and other basic forces described in science, there's endless examples of polarities or contrasts in nature, as well as in our human consciousness and perception, our culture. For example, it's so many of them. Light, dark, day, night, summer, winter, proton, electron, hot, cold, expansion, contraction. I agree with this. I disagree. North, south, east, west, up, down, in, out, left, right, soft and hard, big and small, right, wrong, win, lose, true, false, all, none. Computer bytes themselves, what's bringing this image to you right now, is either on or off. It's that simple. Two states. Motion, rest. Past, future, known, unknown. Pleasure, pain, heaven, hell. Male, female, predator, prey. Peace, war, so on. And finally, the big one, in a way, subjectively, for all us individuals in the world, is the me and the not me. That's a huge difference, isn't it? I mean, we kind of tend to draw our boundaries at our skins. Well, of course, one could say that our brains are just such that we see everything as a duality, having a left and a right brain. But maybe we think that way because dualities are so fundamental to all form. You be the judge. I think, contrasts are just an essential part of all the art forms. And, I'm primarily a visual artist, but I can just see, like in literature and drama, you have, they're all based on resolution of conflict. The protagonist versus others, nature, situations, and tension builds until the end. In music, you have your high and low notes, your fast and slow passages, your loud and soft, your point and counterpoint. In dance, there's oppositional movements, like you move up, down, left, right, forward, backward, faster, slower. There's always a counterbalancing going on. And of course, in architecture and in all kinds of design, there's always an emphasis on contrasting different textures, colors, sizes, shapes, and so on. Like, for example, if you're doing landscape, you might contrast some finely textured lavender with some big, broad, yellow, green, leafy thing. Well, in fine art, there's many kinds of contrasts that we can use to tell our story and draw the viewer's attention, and most pieces use a number of them. So first, let's look at some clear examples of particular contrasts, one at a time. The first and most important one is really value, the light and the dark. This striking piece by Eric Thompson, a Utah artist, is just one of the most beautiful, very much, kind of almost black and white pieces I've ever seen. And one of the interesting things about this, he uses, though he's self-taught, he understands intuitively that a good painting is usually mostly light or mostly dark, and a good ratio is 2/3. This one's about 2/3 light. It's also good to group masses by values. So in a dark area, like her hair, you make the lightest part, that is like the hair highlights, just a little bit darker than that darkest part of the light area, which is kind of the shadow in the small of her back. This creates a simplicity and a unity. You can see it better if you squint your eyes, which is another tip, just to help you see values, apart from the colors. Squint your eyes, then you can more readily see that those hair highlights are a little bit darker than the small of her back. Now, another real basic contrast is warm versus cool colors. And Van Gogh's classic, Starry Night, keeps us to a simple palette of two warm and cool colors, these kind of warm yellows and the blues. Now, this intense contrast really makes the stars and moon pop out, as does his dynamic brushwork. We'll come back to this painting later and look at a number of things he's done. Now, another fundamental thing is just using complements. When you study the color wheel, the two opposite colors on the color wheel, when they're used next to each other, they scintillate. They make each other kind of vibrate. So many artists will stick to a fairly simple color scheme of opposites. So, like here, he uses a red-orange and a blue-green, and kind of slight variations on those. This is Edgar Payne, Breton tuna boats. Now, another classic artist, Pierre Bonnard. Here he uses the same kind of complements in a way, a little bit more clear, less muddied, I guess you'd say, or less toned down. They're contrasted also with color saturation, so he uses a very desaturated, kind of paled out bluish white door, and then that plays off a rather strong orange hue in much of the painting. And he also contrasts a strong saturated orange to a toned down oranges in various places, like you can see that over by the figure and by the chair, and in the window pane in the door. Direction. Edgar Payne uses a really striking contrast here of vertical and horizontal. Those rugged cliffs thrusting up, and then that strong horizontal wash that they're going through. And the scale also is another issue here. The small versus the large. He's got these small little humans next to this huge cliff, and that's a very striking and dramatic contrast. You'll notice that he also uses that orange-blue color scheme. And distance, taking you in. Near versus far, that's a contrast that's used a lot in paintings, particularly amongst people in the Southwest, where we have some great distances to look at. A little tip here that Bill Kramer has used is to push the distance back by making it softer and less detailed, cooler, that is to say bluer, lighter, less saturated with color, more pale. He uses a number of other elements too to contrast, and we'll go into that later. Edward Hopper again tells poignant stories of contrast really between the self and the world, or the inside and the outside. It's, I guess you could say, a variation of distance or space. Notice how this figure is to the side and in contrast to everything else, and he's looking away from the light and the flower and the beauty. That's like a statement about humans, really, that we do that. And he also has masterful contrasts of value, the light and dark, of line, horizontals, verticals, and so on. And then color hues, saturation, some bright, some dull. Now, other contrasts that are used in art, which we could go into, you've got texture, smooth and rough. Edges can be hard or soft. Number, you can have one figure versus a bunch of other figures. You can have motion contrasts, like some part that's dynamic and some part that's more restful. You can contrast gender, masculine and feminine. We'll see a painting in a little bit that does that. And then there's just outright dramas, stories of war, struggle, challenge, conflict, romance, and so on. Oh, there's so many choices. So how do painters successfully weave all these different contrasts together? Well, that brings us to harmony, the third principle of order. In everyday language, harmony is simply how the innate intelligence within us brings order to all the forms of life, all those contrasts. So it's kind of an orchestrational thing, a maestro. I mean, it's intuitive. So because it comes from that first principle, that innate intelligence. So it's how, the extent that we draw upon that intuition to make choices, both our artwork and our lives are more benevolent and beautiful and lower, like more peaceful. But if we like drama, of course, we're also free to choose, imbalance and excess and chaos and so on. There's just a price to pay in terms of peace of mind and maybe creating undesirable outcomes, but it is our choice. This is a show about harmony and beauty, so that's why I'm focusing on that. Now, art processes that most require this kind of ordering, balancing, intuitive process are composition, drawing and brushwork, color harmony, and your final assessment and corrections. I'm sure there's others too, but these are major things in art that are kind of a whole intuitive sort of process. How you put it all together. Let's start with composition. There's some classic formulas like the S, the radial pattern, the seesaw that Edgar Payne talks about in his book on composition. But here's just some general useful tips to help you create and assess a design. First, it's really helpful to do thumbnails. You don't have to take very long at it, just a half a minute or a minute on each one. Just try out 3 or 4 different ways to use lines and masses to lead into a center of interest that's drawn your attention. That's something you like. Simplicity is really best, you know. Rather than trying to tell a huge epic story of all kinds of objects, I mean, it's better to focus in on just a few. Simplicity, as you will recall, is an important feature in a way of the oneness. I mean, a circle is a simple thing, even though it may hold much complex, like in that mandala. So the other thing you want to do is keep the eye moving. It's sort of like that that thing in the yin yang where you want to keep motion going. So you keep the eye moving, but not out of the image. You want to avoid blockages, like say a line of trees that's right flat at the bottom of a painting would keep you from entering into or moving around the image, or a big wall or something like that. And you also just want to kind of keep an eye to balancing all the polarities, all the masses, values, colors. And the golden mean, or the rule of thirds, is a kind of harmonious device that people use sometimes. And like when we talked earlier about using, making 1/3 of the painting light or 1/3 of it dark, and that sort of thing. Also, your focal point is often, it's nice to put it like at some place. If you gridded the painting off, you know, horizontally into 3 rows or 3 columns, where they intersect, those are good places. Like 1/3 of the way in, 1/3 of the way to the left, to the right, up or down, is a good place of balance. And again, aim for simplicity. Less is more. Now, drawing is another artistic skill. It's very learnable, but it's intuitive. It's based primarily on understanding how to get into that quiet, perceiving right brain space and out of our preconceived idea part, the left brain. Then it's obvious to us, for example, that an eye is not shaped like an almond, nor a tree like a lollipop, like a child would draw them. They're actually not ideas, but they're complex, almost abstract shapes, and to be studied carefully by kind of measuring the distance between things, the angle of one thing to another, their relationship. So it's an interconnectedness, is what we're looking at. So it brings back in that unity principle. Now, if you were to copy a photo of a face upside down, then you'll get this if you don't already understand it. Or read Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. Now, drawing and brushwork really kind of the same thing, because you can be drawing with a pencil, pastel, colored pencil, or paintbrush, or whatever, but you're making lines in a way, largely with your implement. So always, when you're doing that, aim to balance these types of opposites. Pretty soon it becomes second nature. It's just kind of rhythmic. So you can have like a hard versus a soft, say, pencil line or brush stroke or edge. You can have a thick one versus a thin one, dark, light. You can have a rough, maybe you could take a pencil and have a real rough kind of texture, or just a very smooth one. And those contrasts would be nice. You can have a detailed sort of drawing versus a loose part of the drawing. Often people will put a loose kind of periphery to the drawing and keep it detailed in the center of interest. You can also contrast with your lines in brush strokes, verticals and horizontals. You can even mass them together in little groups of verticals and little groups of horizontals, or likewise with straight versus curved sorts of marks. You can have diagonals that run in opposite directions. So you see, it's really kind of like I said, a dance. And so as you're working, just, try to get in that feeling of balance. And remember that for everything that you're doing, there's some kind of an opposite to it. Okay, let's look at one more, color harmony. One more intuitive, harmonious, balancing kind of process. Let's begin with a cosmic geometry lesson, courtesy of my mentor from the 1980s in California, Tom Allen. First, he said, it's really important to learn the color wheel. It's not arbitrary, it's physics, and it reflects the order of the universe. Amazingly, as he pointed out, any symmetrical geometrical shape laid on top of the color wheel points to colors that are harmonious together. Isn't that cool? I thought so. The simplest such shape is a straight line. It just points to complementary color schemes, which we've talked about before, the opposites. In this case, violet red and yellow green. We talked about blues and oranges a lot. But in the Sonoran Desert, here where I live, near where I live, the violet red and yellow green are very common complements that you see in nature, like the mountain here and then the foliage. So it's really easy and natural to use those opposites, and they're harmonious because they're a straight line, symmetrical shape on the color wheel. Now, next thing would be triangles. So the equilateral color scheme is exemplified by just, a triangle made of equal sides. And so say the three primary colors from which everything else could be mixed, red, yellow, and blue, is a good example. And it's a classic, beautiful color scheme, as in this drawing here of a cat by Naomi Pridgeon. And I love the way that she's used those three primaries, red, yellow, and blue, in everything in the painting. It's a very consistent and orderly piece. And it has a great feeling of harmony and restfulness, not only because of the subject matter, but the balance and harmony of color. Now, a split complementary color scheme is really just an isosceles or elongated triangle. And again, a symmetrical geometrical shape laid on the color wheel points to colors that are in perfect harmony with each other. Now here's an example from Mary Cassatt. She's harmonizing, she has a split complementary scheme. She's taking the pink dress on the baby, which is really red, right, with white, and the split complements are across the way there on the color wheel are blue-green and yellow-green. And that's pretty much the main things that she's doing in the whole painting. Also has some stellar contrasts of value, texture, direction, and even gender, as you can see here. And it's interesting that both the male and the female are looking at the baby, who's in the center, and it's sort of like, you could say, if it's parents there, that the child comes from both sides, so it's kind of like almost the unity principle there. That's a little aside, but anyway, I couldn't resist that. Now you can also create harmonious color schemes with squares or pentangles laid upon the color wheel, and that can get pretty complicated. Or you can just use several complements next to each other. For example, there's a violet and a yellow there in her clothing, and by her hand you see her hand's kind of orange and a blue sleeve. Those are opposites. Up at the top you see a red rose and the next to a green foliage. So there's some nice examples of complements next to each other. Now it's also fascinating, as Tom pointed out, that an equal mix of any harmonious colors, by these different schemata, will all mix to a nice neutral gray. So as he said, that's like the still place in the center of everything, and it is evidence of divine order in the universe. Finally, one of the processes in art that we need to do is to kind of assess what we're doing and make corrections. And we do well to stop occasionally as we work. Step back, take a look, just kind of breathe. Some people actually do this every 3 or 4 strokes. I usually don't, but and anyway, but just kind of consider, is it working? Are the contrasts balanced? Have you used just enough but not too many to tell your story? You just kind of turn it over to that more stepping back, intuitive process. It draws on really both the left and right brain, on your knowledge as well as just your sense of intuition. And if you don't overthink it, such breaks will take you out of autopilot, and they'll awaken just a big picture, more intuitive state, the unity principle. So go back and forth between actively painting and being still and observant. Then you go back and you make corrections or wipeouts as needed, just without overworking it, hopefully. And that's probably one of the biggest lessons for most of us. Okay, let's put it together now. And let's look at some examples of some masterful paintings and see if we can better identify and appreciate these 3 principles. Unity, like a spiritual theme of wholeness that underlies the whole subject matter, maybe some unifying technical devices. Contrast, ways the artist uses any opposites in form, like value, hue, texture, direction, size, all these things we talked about. And finally, harmony, how everything's organized. Going back to Eric Thompson's beautiful figure piece, when we studied for values, we can also see there's a very subtle contrast of orange and blue opposites. Very subtle. And a pleasing balance of softness in the painting, like in the shadow edges, and hard edges, like around her hand, and that shadow line across the sheet under her back there. And there's just a Zen-like simplicity to the whole thing, yet a great presence to detail. So the style itself is showing us a power of observation. And I heard from his wife that the artist meditates every day, and he aims to bring the sense of that still space into his work, and he clearly succeeds at doing that. So the spiritual theme here, I think, is just that simple stillness of inner peace. And I could also say that the way that her hand is kind of wrapped around her also just suggests that beautiful state, contemplative feeling of love. Back to Starry Night, it's interesting to notice not only the warm-cool contrast, but the strong directional contrasts of brushwork. You'll see swirls in the sky, diagonals, verticals, like in the steeple and the trees, and up at the horizontal land. Van Gogh also repeats the motif of the stars. That's a unifying thing to do, to repeat a motif. And he groups similar brush strokes in little patterns. Like if you look at the sky, there's a lot of kind of parallel lines that swirl around together. And if you look at those, I guess, trees to the right of the village, you'll see a lot of the same shape repeated, that little curve. And then in the, I think it's probably cypress trees in the foreground, you'll see kind of a lot of parallel lines there. Cézanne did a lot of that kind of structured parallel brushstroke kind of work too. And that's a unifying device. Could have brought that up earlier, but here it is. Also, those warm-cool contrasts are greater than because they're light and dark contrasts as well. And then the trees and the steeple have unifying elements. They're interconnecting the earth and the cosmos, the heavens and the earth. So I would say that, when you study this painting for a while, the spiritual theme that I get out of this is it's like the reach of humanity towards the heavens, the steeple, and nature, the trees reaching up. They're interconnecting with the brilliant cosmos from which we've all come. Now back to Bill Kramer's Grand Canyon piece. He got an Artist's Choice Award for this at a 2012 Grand Canyon Celebration of the Art events, and that's quite an honor. He not only contrasts the near and the far, as we saw before, but he also contrasts blues and oranges, opposites on the color wheel, the figure and the ground, there's the tree and all the background, and he contrasts like light and dark, especially by the tree, textures, and direction. There's some unity aspects in here too. He includes a passage, the river, that leads you to the distance, to the vastness. And there's interconnected masses where the limb of the tree is reaching out to that vast distance to the unity aspect, I guess you'd say. And there's a warm, unifying glow of orange tones. It looks almost as though the painting is being glazed in part, though I think he just accomplishes it alla prima, that is to say, with his original brush strokes. The spiritual theme I see here is something like this, that the sometimes gnarly dance of living as an individual is real for us, and yet we can also connect with the whole. He calls this twist and shout. Now here's another Southwest painter, a Utah artist, Wallace Lee. He very effectively orchestrated a number of contrasts to tell this story here. He's got very strong horizontals and verticals. The horizontal cliffs, the vertical land, and even the kind of excuse me, I said the opposite. The vertical cliffs and the horizontal land and the horizontal clouds there. And he's got light and dark, very strong and clear. He's got hard edges, and he's got soft edges. He's got opposite colors, orange and blue, some of which are more saturated and intense, and some of which are more neutral and desaturated. He's got a near and far aspect. The spiritual theme that I see here is something like ancient ones, ancient beings like the rocks, reaching up to the heavens and shining with the glory of the light essence. They're very majestic. Back to Marcia Burt's garden painting here. She often creates a complex patterned composition and balances it very intuitively, working freely without really a plan. I mean, some artists will go in there and almost engineer a painting, but she works more spontaneously and intuitively, and this turns out very well for her usually. You know, it's opposite colors, contrast, the saturation, direction, and value, texture are all in this painting, and they all harmonize beautifully. She also has a lead-in here, or a subtle path that takes you to the mountain. So you notice, like back to the colors, like she's got, you know, a bright red-orange next to kind of a more dulled-down bluish-green, and well, there's a lot going on here, really. I mean, it's hard to point it out without a pointer, but then there's some very striking dark and light areas too, especially if you squint your eyes. And if you squint your eyes, it's a fairly simple design. There's really just a few masses there of values. The spiritual theme that I see here in Marcia's work is a celebration of the vibrance, the beauty, and the connectedness of life. Just kind of the joie de vivre. Now, Richard Drayton has a beautiful piece here that has a soft feeling to it, a soft kind of harmony between the sky and the earth. And he achieves this by repeating and carefully balancing the curving and rolling forms. Notice how the underside of the clouds kind of repeats the kind of the recessed curves of the hills, and the upper protrusion of the hill, the dome of it, so to speak, is similar to the dome on the cloud. And yet he contrasts like light and dark. Again, if you squint your eyes, it's a very simple composition of values. And he uses just enough hard edge for contrast, but mostly keeps a lot of it very soft. He masses his light and dark very well. And it's a simple but powerful design. The spiritual theme I see here is something like as above, so below, or the gentle interconnectedness of nature and sky, of heaven and earth. It just gives you the feeling of everything's well and at ease. This piece by the California Impressionist William Ritzel masterfully balances a number of things. Here we see light and dark values. Squint your eyes again. You have nice opposite colors. You can see blues and oranges, but also notice how on the rock out there there's yellows, and there's kind of a violet at the base of the rock. He didn't just use gray. It's a violetized gray. And he uses also a saturation contrast there. It's a stronger kind of yellow there, and then a more dull sort of gray at that particular place. And then he's got, of course, the near and the far, and he's got horizontal and vertical lines, the strong horizontal of the horizon versus the strong vertical of the tree. And then he also brings in that horizontal of the path, and I think that really helps balance that strong horizontal up at the horizon. See, you can, if it weren't there, it kind of blocked that out with your finger. It's not as strong a painting. So he knew what he was doing somehow. Whether he was conscious of it or it just, comes with a intuitive artistic sense that, again, is drawing upon that spirit place in us. So Ritzel also uses line to lead your eye toward the rock, that diagonal as it kind of moves out into the ocean. And yet he keeps you safely anchored in the foreground with the trees. That's a nice balance right there between being here and going there. It's kind of a scary place where you could drown. The spiritual theme is something like that. I think being rock solid in the face of the vastness, of life and the mystery of the unknown. There's kind of something a place you can rest and be strong. Be interesting to confirm some of these with the people that created them, wouldn't it? Now, speaking of which, here's Edward Hopper again. Now, he was a master of balancing very strong, kind of edgy contrasts. Now, this is almost like two paintings. He's got not only very, very strong contrasts of value, but there's almost different styles. The two women on the lower left are almost like some classic, dark, kind of medieval painting or classic painting with stronger brush strokes, stronger texture, light and dark, warm colors, and all that. And then he has this cool, light, pastel, kind of more vague background, which has what we could call a bridge to nowhere or everywhere. It just disappears into the mystery, right? And together, I think that these two paintings within a painting dramatize a story that's telling us about the insular contrast of people versus nature, that we will kind of get in our own little world with each other, a world of ideas and language, and kind of ignore the beauty that's around us all too often. And I think that's a powerful statement. Now here we have John Cogan's Bright Angel Morning. He's commonly paints the Grand Canyon, and he's really good with color harmony. You can see the orange and blue is pretty nice, used in a nice soft kind of skillful way, and then there's also red and green in the foliage down there on the left of the path. He's got near and far, and also though it's predominantly soft textured, if you see it in person, there's a lot of little fine hard edge detail in some of the foliage there. It's a contrast which accentuates the near far part. And then there's some saturation contrast with stronger oranges, for example on the rocks in the back glow of the rocks nearby, and subtler oranges in the distance and in the shadow. And he's got some pretty strong value contrast there too in the shadows. Now the path itself is a lot of the story here. It's leading you to a mysterious distance, and yet it's bright and beautiful where you are. So I think giving a sense of joy, peace, and hope right before us. So the theme I get out of this is like we're on an infinite journey, and yet there's light along the way, here and now. Now here, going to the world of abstraction, Agnes Pelton has a beautiful otherworldly harmony here of this object. Who knows what it is? She calls it Meadowlark's Song, Winter. Yeah, kind of mixing, music and visuals there, which is interesting in itself. So she balances the form and the formless. She's got this object in the center, and then this soft, formless area in the background. There's opposite colors, again, kind of the warm, cool, or the kind of orangish, yellowish, orange, kind of bluish contrast here. And then you've got light and dark, especially in the lower left. There's a very dark area and a very light area. That's an interesting, edgy composition. Yeah, it's balanced by a very strong form, rising upward there. Then she also counterbalances the direction of the curves. If you'll notice, some of the curves are kind of more predominantly horizontal, like in the blues back there in the background. And then that yellowish object, they're more vertical, but they're both curves. Now thematically, the light area seems to me like a passage, and that it's also like it's ascending to some light place above and has a sense of mystery, like to what? We don't know. So it's got that mystery, the passage, the higher, the light, all that is in here. So it seems pretty straightforward to me, like it's some kind of a passage to the spirit world or to the center. It's going light to light and going upward. Beautiful piece. Now here's a much loved painting, Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. And a quite different kind of painting with a lot of great detail and form in it. If you see it up close, one of his pieces, there's a lot of patient rendering of all the little grasses and so forth. But that aside, he's really showing us a great contrast between near and far, the figure in the ground, really, literally, opposite hues he's got there, pinks and greens and so on. There's a contrast between a very smooth sky and the very textured detail of the grass, light and dark values, and compositionally, her posture is really strikingly leading your eye to the focal point of the home. And home in itself is a powerful archetype of a universal longing to go home. The fact that she's handicapped and can really just crawl her way home says something about the limitations that we all experience from being human, and the poignancy of the contrast between that and our longing to go home. And finally, I'm going to close with one of my own works, I think one of my better pieces. And it's interesting that first of all, I set a very deep intention to do something special, using a subject I really loved, a beautiful oak tree in Santa Cruz where I was living at the time. Inspiration is something that comes from that first principle of spirit. Then I consciously worked with contrasts of warm and cool, complementary oranges and blues, and then I have some yellow greens and kind of blue violets there, and red violets, excuse me, and then I'm contrasting some brighter, more saturated colors with some more muted ones. I have distance, near and far, a contrasted direction, up and down, the figure in the ground, the one tree versus the many trees in the forest. There's overlaps between the branches showing interconnection. And most of all, there's this sort of sense of connection of the tree is reaching up to the heavens, and the roots are going down into the earth. So that's like a balance between those two forces. And that's really what people seem to get out of this painting too. So it's like the spiritual theme, you could say, is the endurance and the beauty of the individual, like the tree, reaching for heaven, yet rooted in the earth. So finally, I wanted to add too that this image inspired one of the first poems I ever wrote to accompany a painting. And I find that a really helpful process. It's very intuitive, and it quickly takes me to the inner meaning in art. I often it's like I'm taking dictation. I'll just hear the first few words, and even if they're kind of strange, I'll just go with it and see where it takes me. So this one's called Of Heaven and Earth. Rooted they, the trees, standing firm they must, burrowed deep their roots in solid ground, yet reaching up to heaven, turning every leaf to the blessing of light, receiving, embracing, day after day, season after season, beyond reason, through clouds and rain, through the fall of dark, silently they wait the dawn, knowing, trusting, the light will come again. They stand firm. They know they hold the balance of heaven and earth. I want to thank you for your presence and attention, for watching this. Thanks for your being and all the beauty that you bring to the world and all the goodness. It's not easy being a human being. If you'd like to see more of my works in poetry accompanying them, I have a book called Spirit of the Earth, which you can get on Amazon or on my website, susanpitcairn.com. Again, thank you. Be well.